To this point, we've talked a lot about using R and coding in R as a language, but we haven't actually practiced writing very much code. And we'll practice writing code each week, iteratively, a little bit deeper, going into some of the different subsections of statistics. But for now, I just want to give you this overview of the types of different things you can do in R in a basic way. We sort of jumped right in to using RStudio, but traditionally the first thing you're supposed to do whenever you're learning a new language is whenever you're learning a new programming language, is make the system say hello world. And it doesn't mean just writing it, it means actually making the system give that to you and say it back to you. And so you can obviously write hello world here in the text editor, and it will just sit there. But what we want is for R to actually output hello world. And so there are a few different ways to get R to output hello world. One of them is to use the command print. And so if I use the command print and hello world, and I highlight this and execute it by pressing run, down here in the console, it'll print out hello world. R has said hello world back to me. I could also save hello world as a separate object. So we've talked about loading data into R and having that show up in our environment in the top right. And we can also create objects that will exist up there. So I can create an object called hello, and this arrow is assigning something to this item hello, and I'm going to assign the phrase hello world. And now I have this object called hello in my environment. And now I can print my object. I can use my object later after I've saved it. And so by printing my object hello, R has again said hello world to me. We don't have to just save words as objects. We can create anything we want as an object. So I can create X, and I can assign it the value 2. And now I have the value 2 in my environment under the label X. I can create the object Y, and I can give that multiple values. And now I have an object Y, which is numeric, and it takes the values 1, 2, and 3. I can also just do math in R. R is a calculator. And so anytime I give R a math problem, it will give me the correct answer. So I can do something like add 2 plus 3. I don't need to have an equals. If I execute it, R is assuming that I wanted to calculate what 2 plus 3 equals. And so if I execute that, down here in my console, it gives me the answer 5. I can use my objects to do math too. I could do something like X times Y. And it'll give me 3 different values because I have 3 different values for Y. 2 times 1 is 2, 2 times 2 is 4, 2 times 3 is 6. R is doing that math for me. Now the bigger projects are going to involve loading in data, and we'll spend in a sort of more advanced lecture talk about loading data in from outside of R. But as I've talked about and hinted at, R has a lot of data built into it already, and this is great for sort of class examples and working through some of these different projects. The way to look at the data that is available in R is just to write the command data with an open parentheses. And if you execute that, you'll be given a list of all of the data sets that R has available to you right now. And so the way to load one of those in is to use that command again, data. And I'll load in this one, USArrest. And now that's going to be loaded into my environment. USArrest has data on each US state and its arrest rate for murder. I don't have to remember because I can look at it. So I'll write the command view and USArrest. And when I write that, it'll show me the data. And so it has the murder, the assaults, the urban population, how many people live in an urban area, and the number of rapes per 10,000 people. I think all these numbers are per 10,000 people. And so there are 50 observations because there are 50 states. Right. And so if I wanted to just see the top 5 lines of my data, instead of viewing all of the data, if you have a data set with 100,000 lines, you probably don't want to look at it all because it's a lot to digest. But if I wanted to look at just the top few lines of my data to get an idea of what's inside of it, I could use the command head, which is just going to give me those top 5 lines. And so I can see the top 5 states sorted by alphabetical order. I can see the column names, and I can see the figures for those. And so I can see that all of these columns are numeric, all of them are numbers. If I wanted to see the bottom of the data, I could write tail. That gives me the other end. Wyoming is the 50th observation in the data. And so that's just a quick way to get an idea of what's inside of it. If I just wanted to look at the names of my columns, figure out what the data has inside of it, I could use the command names. And so that's going to tell me that I have a column for murder, I have a column for assault, urban population, and rape. And so that's another way to get a handle on what my data is going to be telling me. If I want to look at a quick graph of my data, there are a few different commands, and we'll talk about that in a few weeks. But one simple way to look at it is to use this command plot. And if I want to look at, because I have multiple columns in my data, I have to tell R what columns I want to actually graph at any point. And so with this data, I need to tell it what data frame I want to use, US or RES, and I need to tell it which columns I actually want to graph. And so I want to look at the murder rate, and let's say the assault. And this is going to figure out how best to graph this data. And in this case, it'll be a scatter plot because I have 2 numeric values. And so it's plotting the murder rate for each state against the assault rate. And we can see that generally, as murders increase, there are more assaults in each state. And this, again, is going to always come down into the bottom right corner of my screen whenever I create a graph. If I wanted to calculate the average for one of these columns, I could do that with the command mean. And so I could do this for any of the columns, but I have to tell it which column I want to look at. Let's take a look at the urban population. And so this is doing the math for me again. It's figuring out the average value for urban population in this data, and that's 65.54. I can also look at the mean by just calculating all of the summary statistics. And I can do that with the summary command. Which will give me more than just the mean. It'll give me the median, it'll give me the quartiles, it'll give me the min and the max. And so that gives me a rounded view of what the data in this column. These are some of the sort of basic commands you'll get used to using in R throughout time. And whenever you want to remove a data set that you have and you no longer need, you can use RM. So I can remove this object hello. RM, I can remove US RES. If I close RStudio, all of the data will be cleaned out regardless. But sometimes you have a large data frame that's going to slow down RStudio or your machine, and so you might want to be able to remove one from time to time. And it's good housekeeping to remove anything you're not currently using. In the future weeks, we'll go into a lot more depth on a lot of these commands, but for now, that gives you sort of an idea of the things that we're able to do.